Athens and Rome stand side by side at the birth of Western civilization. The comparison is almost irresistible. Greece, brilliant, curious, alive with ideas. Rome, stern, disciplined, built for endurance. For centuries, it has been tempting to imagine them as opposites, Greece the mind, Rome the muscle. But this picture is incomplete. Greece was not born weak. It was Greek courage that turned back the Persian invasions, Greek discipline that held the line at Marathon and Plataea, Greek ambition that carried Alexander's armies to the edges of the known world. When Rome was still securing her foothold in Italy, Greek civilization already stretched from the Aegean to Egypt, from Asia Minor to Persia. These were not twin powers rising together, they were successors. Rome does not emerge as a world force until she encounters Greek culture face to face, not in libraries or temples, but in the fields and cities of southern Italy. And Greece's decline does not truly reveal itself until her proud phalanxes break against the Roman legion. There was also a division of space as well as time. Greece shaped the East, Rome claimed the West. Even after Rome absorbed Greek art, philosophy, and learning, the Western world remained Roman at its core, in its laws, its roads, its institutions, its sense of order. When Constantine later divided the empire, he did not invent this split. He merely acknowledged a cultural truth that already existed. Rome and Greece were kin. Their languages, customs, and traditions reveal deep connections, whether born of shared ancestry, migration, or long contact across the Mediterranean. Yet the most important difference between them was not blood, it was character. Athens thrived on ideas. It questioned, experimented, and delighted in brilliance. Rome believed in duty, in law, in continuity. Where Athens admired genius, Rome honored obligation. These are the two great forces of history set against one another: creativity and control, imagination and order. And Rome's victory did not lie in beauty or inspiration. It lay in permanence. Even today, Roman roads still cut straight through the land. Roman foundations still support modern cities. Rome was not loved the way Greece was loved, but she endured. And that endurance, cold, methodical, relentless, is the true measure of Rome's grandeur. The modern observer approaches Rome with baggage. He is a citizen of an empire vast enough to unsettle its own conscience. And like all empires, he cannot resist searching the past for warnings. The Roman Empire bears an obvious resemblance to later imperial powers, too obvious to ignore. And so Roman history is often reduced to a single obsession: its fall. Rome, in this telling, exists only to fail. First, a republic already rotting from within, then an empire supposedly corrupt from birth, lingering in decay for centuries before finally collapsing. This vision owes less to Rome itself and more to the historians who wrote about her. Above all, to Gibbon. His genius was undeniable, but his temperament was satirical, skeptical, and severe. He inherited the bitterness of Tacitus and sharpened it further. By accident of history, the Roman Republic found no great historian until it was already dying, when civil war had turned memory into nostalgia and the distant past into moral myth. The early empire fared no better. It was left largely in the hands of writers hostile to its rule, men trained in rhetoric, fluent in irony, more interested in epigram than balance. Thus, Rome's virtue was pushed ever backward, into an age modern scholarship recognizes as half-legend. Rome, it seems, has rarely been allowed a fair hearing, and sympathy for her is rarer still. Greece inspires love, Rome inspires judgment. Mention her name and the imagination leaps at once to the Colosseum, to martyrs and lions, to tyranny and spectacle. The next instinct is explanation. Why did Rome fall? Everyone has an answer. Luxury, says the moralist. Paganism, says the Christian. Christianity, says Gibbon. Militarism, says one. Neglect of service, says another. The conservative blames the demagogue. The liberal blames the Senate. Each age reshapes Rome into a mirror for its own anxieties. But this habit of treating Rome as a corpse to be dissected or a sermon to be preached is an insult to history. The idea of an empire simply declining for 5 centuries is not profound, it is absurd. Rome did not survive for generations through decay alone. She endured because she worked, because she adapted, because she governed. If Rome was flawed, then she was flawed on a colossal scale, and so was her achievement. To understand Rome, we must stop asking only how she fell and begin asking how she stood for so long. Rome liked to tell a good story about itself, a story of humble beginnings, of bravery, of destiny. But when we look closely at the earliest kings of Rome, that story starts to unravel. Take Servius Tullius, for example. According to tradition, he was of servile origin, possibly born a slave. From this, the historian Freeman famously argued that early Rome was a place where talent could rise, even to kingship, an inspiring idea. But perhaps a little too neat. Then there are the Tarquins, the last kings of Rome. Their very names appear to be Etruscan, not Roman at all. Later, Greek historians reshaped the final Tarquin into the familiar figure of a Greek-style tyrant, complete with a moral tale of tyrannicide, suspiciously similar to the story of Harmodius and Aristogeiton. And what if some of Rome's most heroic legends were invented for a reason? There is a growing theory that the famous story of Horatius defending the bridge, holding off the enemy almost single-handedly, is not history, but myth. A story meant to disguise a far less flattering truth. What if Rome wasn't saved from the Etruscans, but conquered by them? There is, in fact, a great deal of evidence pointing in that direction. Hints and reluctant admissions buried in Roman literature, records of an ancient treaty that looks suspiciously like submission, the symbols of supreme Roman authority, the robes, the rituals, the insignia, all of unmistakably Etruscan origin. And then there is the most stubborn evidence of all, the stones. Rome shows signs of remarkable engineering skill at a very early date. Massive walls, great sewers, monumental construction. Unless the Romans later forgot how to build, which seems highly unlikely, these early works must have been created under foreign influence. Still, one thing is beyond doubt. Early Rome did have kings. The entire Roman constitution and the very concept of imperium only makes sense if kingship once existed. It is entirely reasonable, then, to believe that Rome was once ruled by Etruscan princes, forming part of a loose coastal empire stretching along Italy, more interested in ports and trade than in the rugged inland territories. For centuries, Italy was a battleground, civilized walled towns along the coast, locked in constant struggle with fierce hill tribes from the mountains beyond. And at the heart of this world were the Etruscans, one of the most mysterious peoples of the ancient Mediterranean. Scholars have fought bitter wars over their origins. Some claim they came from Lydia in Asia Minor. Others insist they emerged from the Alpine regions. Each side has demolished the other's arguments repeatedly. The truth may be simpler. The Etruscans may have come from nowhere at all. They may have been native to Italy, as ancient and autochthonous as any European people. Their language still largely resists our understanding, but so does that of many indigenous cultures, including the early Cretans. Their earliest remains, polygonal stonework, beehive tombs, black Buchero pottery, appear all across the prehistoric Mediterranean. Later, their art shows a clear kinship with Greece, though often with a strange, almost grotesque character of its own. They were master bronze workers, skilled painters, innovative potters. The British Museum still preserves vivid Etruscan frescoes from Caire, bursting with life and color. Pliny believed Greek painters had settled in Etruria, but ancient writers often explained similarity by migration. In reality, Etruscan art may well have been homegrown. Their artistic golden age, during the 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, coincided with the height of their power. Yet their culture carried a darker reputation. The Etruscans were deeply superstitious, cruel, according to Roman accounts. It was from them that Rome learned the grisly art of divination, reading the future in the entrails of freshly slain victims, and those victims were not always animals. By the late 6th century BCE, Rome was already engaging in overseas trade. An ancient treaty with Carthage, probably genuine, shows Rome agreeing not to trade in Carthaginian waters while being recognized as the leading power of the Latin League. Rome was learning something early. If no other art, she mastered diplomacy. Very early on, Rome discovered her greatest secret: divide et impera, divide and rule. Within the Latin League, Rome demanded equality with all the other cities combined. When the allies resisted, even modestly, Rome fought them. In 338 BCE, Rome defeated the League, then she dismantled it. Each city received its own separate treaty, limited rights, the right to trade, the right to intermarry, but never with one another, only with Rome. Latium became economically dependent on the city. All roads, all markets led through Roman hands. This was imperial genius. Rome founded colonies like Ostia, planted at the mouth of the Tiber. Its settlers remained Roman citizens, but served Rome by simply holding the ground. Other conquered peoples received citizenship without the vote. Some towns became municipia, locally self-governing yet fully Roman in law. No tribute, no Greek-style oppression, just gradual absorption. Rome was ruthless in conquest, but astonishingly generous in rule, and yet Rome's allies never forgot what they had lost. By the late 4th century BCE, the Republic was locked in a brutal struggle that would shape its destiny: the long and terrible wars against the Samnites of the southern Apennines. This conflict, lasting nearly 50 years, was the true turning point. From this crucible, Rome would emerge no longer a regional power, but a force destined to dominate the Mediterranean. The symbols of Roman power did not begin in Rome. We are told that the very insignia of royalty, the purple-bordered toga, the scarlet-striped robe, the ivory scepter, the curule chair, and the 12 lictors carrying bundles of rods with axes, were all borrowed from the Etruscans. Even the toga itself tells a story. The classic Roman citizen, wearing a simple tunic wrapped in a long flowing mantle, was dressed much like a Greek in chiton and himation. This was not a native invention. It appears to have been a fashion introduced by Rome's more sophisticated northern neighbors. Roman art followed the same path. The earliest decoration of Roman temples, painted terracotta ornaments, was unmistakably Etruscan in origin. Some of the oldest statues of Roman gods were painted in bright colors. Ancient writers even speak of a red-painted Jupiter, worshipped in Rome's earliest days. All this points to a striking conclusion. Rome likely passed through a period, probably in the 6th century BCE, of foreign rule and foreign civilization. And because Etruscan culture was closely related to Greek culture, Rome was quietly being prepared for Greek influence long before it consciously embraced it. But Etruscan power did not last. The 5th century BCE marked their decline. The Greek city-states, strengthened as we have seen by northern influences, had surged ahead intellectually and militarily. In 474 BCE, the tyrant Hiero of Syracuse crushed the Etruscans in a decisive naval battle. For historians, this is a rare luxury, a solid fact, a clear date, in a wilderness of legend. From that point on, the Etruscan world began to collapse. Warlike hill tribes from the southern Apennines pressed in on their colonies. Then, early in the 4th century, the Gauls swept down from the north and shattered what remained of the Etruscan Empire forever. It was probably during this turbulent era that Rome expelled her Etruscan kings. In place of monarchy, the Romans created something new: 2 equal magistrates sharing royal powers and insignia, but without crown or scepter. Thus emerges the Rome of the earliest credible tradition, a city ruled by 2 consuls and a senate of nobles, a city of farmhouses rather than palaces, a society in which each household was ruled by its head with near patriarchal authority. This was the growing republic, and it is here that we must abandon a great deal of beloved history. The stirring legends of early Rome, the tales designed to instruct youth, do not survive serious scrutiny. There were no contemporary records. The annals and lists of magistrates used by later historians like Livy were compiled centuries after the events they describe. Greek influence is visible everywhere. Greek writers rationalized Roman names and customs. They imported fragments of Greek history. They projected later political struggles backward in time. They invented speeches for early politicians who never existed. In short, they demonstrated the extraordinary power of Greek imagination and Roman willingness to believe flattering myths. By the 2nd century BCE, Rome's great families were unimaginably wealthy. They possessed ancient names and vast estates. At aristocratic funerals, long processions of wax masks, imagines, were paraded through the streets, representing the noble ancestors of the dead. Funeral orations followed. Heroic deeds were recounted. Family legends grew richer with each retelling. And when Greek scribes, poor, clever, and eager for patronage, offered their services, Roman history at last came into being. It was often written in Greek, sometimes under Roman names, but always shaped by Greek literary tradition. This is how we receive the heroic Fabii, the noble Horatii, and the arrogantly wicked Claudii. Painful though it may be, we must take a knife to these stories. Consider just one coincidence. Tarquin, the Roman tyrant, was expelled in 510 BCE, the exact same year that Hippias, the Athenian tyrant, was driven out of Athens. The resemblance is suggestive. Meanwhile, Rome was fighting for survival. At various stages, nearly every people of Italy rose against her: Latins, Etruscans, Umbrians, Marsi, Gauls. And above all, the Samnites, a race of born fighters led by capable generals. In 321 BCE, disaster struck. Both Roman consuls and the entire army were trapped in the narrow defile of the Caudine Pass. It was a humiliation without equal. But Rome did not surrender. The Senate simply refused to admit defeat. Again and again, beaten to its knees, Rome rejected peace unless it meant victory. That is extraordinary, if Rome was merely one city among many in Latium. But this war changed everything. It was during the Samnite Wars that Rome developed the fighting system that would one day conquer the world. Until now, armies fought in solid lines, phalanxes of men standing shoulder to shoulder, rank behind rank, pushing with spear and shield. Victory depended on weight, depth, and cohesion. The Romans broke this tradition. They fought in open formation, not a single mass, but flexible units called maniples. Each soldier became an independent fighter, not merely pushing a pike, but fencing skillfully with his sword. The reasons are debated. Perhaps the Romans were often outnumbered. Perhaps Gallic warriors with long swords forced adaptation. Whatever the cause, the result was revolutionary. A maniple of 200 men was faster, more flexible, and covered more ground than a rigid phalanx 3 times its size. This transformation changed Roman society, where once only the front ranks, the wealthiest citizens, had full armor. Now the entire army required proper equipment. That demand reshaped Rome's social and political system, and once this system was perfected, the Roman soldier became nearly unbeatable. It is even possible that the original statue dates back to a time of totemistic religion, when the wolf was believed to be the ancestor of a Roman clan. The so-called 7 kings of Rome are, for the most part, little more than names. Later antiquarians, probably Greek, fitted them with biographies that suited their purposes. Romulus is simply Rome's patron hero, bearing her name. Numa, whose name suggests Numen, is the blameless Sabine lawgiver, credited with founding Roman religion, his life largely borrowed from the Greek Solon. Tullus Hostilius and Ancus Martius are conveniently martial figures, inventors of war and military institutions. The coincidences give the game away. Tarquin, the Roman tyrant, is expelled in the same year as Hippias of Athens, 510 BCE. The 12 tables are drawn up in 451 BCE, the same year as the Code of Protagoras at Thurii. 300 Fabii die to a man at the Cremera, just as 300 Spartans die with Leonidas at Thermopylae. To put it plainly, nothing before the Gallic invasion of 390 BCE, and very little for nearly a century after, can be trusted on literary evidence alone. The stones, however, tell us more. The earliest Rome was a settlement on the Palatine Hill, with a citadel and temple on the Capitol, and a market, the Forum, on the low ground between them. On the Esquiline Hill lived a plebeian settlement. It was a pastoral agricultural community. Wealth was measured in cattle. Fields were plowed and harvested only so far as a man could walk in a day, or an army could defend. From the beginning, society was dominated by a few great patrician houses, each surrounded by clients and slaves. In every household, the father ruled as an absolute king. He held power of life and death over sons, daughters, and slaves alike. Daughters passed from father to husband by a formal act of sale. From deep antiquity survives a chilling fragment of early Latin law. If a boy strikes his father and the father complains, let the boy be devoted to the gods of parents. That is to say, killed as a sacrifice. This was the commonwealth of such men, no gentle lovers of liberty. But from among them came the Senate, meeting in the temple to decide policy, and the assembly of citizens, the Comitium, who gathered fully armed to vote on the Senate's decrees delivered by the consuls. Some modern historians, especially those of the economic school, like to imagine Rome's origins in a very particular way. They picture a kind of primeval limited company, a band of hard-headed businessmen roaming the Mediterranean, searching for the perfect commercial hub, a place central enough to handle Spanish copper and Syrian frankincense, convenient for trade with the Etruscans to the north, the Greek cities of Sicily to the south, and the Carthaginians across the African coast. According to this vision, they find such a spot on rising ground beside the river Tiber, about 15 miles from the sea. Safe for cargo boats, easy to defend. There they build an exchange, found a chamber of commerce, quaintly called the Senate, and establish a form of public insurance known as an army. With these tools in hand, they proceed, by force or fraud, to acquire markets. And in time, they give this collection of markets a name: empire. It is a clever picture, modern, entertaining, and almost certainly wrong. To begin with, the Tiber was no natural highway of commerce. Its mouth silted up every year, its channel constantly shifted. In spring, the low ground between Rome's hills turned into swamps and stagnant pools. There was no tide in the Mediterranean to help ships row upstream against the current, and the Etruscans, who combined trade with systematic piracy, controlled most of the western coast. The Greeks of southern Italy, who wrote plenty about Etruscan and Carthaginian sailors, say almost nothing about Roman merchants, perhaps because early Rome had very little to sell, and certainly no money with which to buy. In founding their supposed boars, the Romans seem to have forgotten to create a mint. Long after the Sicilian Greeks were striking exquisite coins of silver and gold, Rome was still using the massive, clumsy copperas. No serious Mediterranean trade could function on such a basis. In fact, in Latin, the very word for money originally meant cattle. Whoever the early Romans were, they were not merchants of the sea. Everything about their religion, customs, and traditions points to the same conclusion. They were farmers and soldiers. Livy, for once, takes the sensible view. He admits that the stories surrounding Rome's foundation are tangled in miracle and mystery, but, he says, if any city deserved a miraculous origin, Rome did. And with that, he tells the famous tale, the founding of Rome in 753 BCE by Romulus and Remus. There is little profit in digging for historical fact beneath such legends, but it is interesting to ask how they began. The story of Romulus and Remus may have grown out of something very simple, a sacristan's tale about an ancient statue showing a wolf suckling two infants. A version of this image survives in the famous Capitoline wolf. The wolf itself is ancient. The babies were added in modern times, copied from ancient coins, grim in peace, relentless in war. As soon as she was free, if not earlier, Rome appears as a member of the Latin League, ruling the plain of Latium under the leadership of Alba Longa. This tradition is supported by ancient rituals that survived long after. Rome's earliest wars were against tiny neighbors like Gabii, a name that later Romans found laughably insignificant. But it was in these small, constant skirmishes that Rome learned her trade. If one asks why Rome succeeded where others failed, the answer is simple: she fought bravely, and she obeyed orders. Discipline was Rome's secret. That discipline came from the household, from the strict patriarchal system that shaped Roman character, and that system was certainly not Mediterranean in origin. Whether the famous geese that saved the capital were real or merely legendary hardly matters. What is certain is that Rome suffered less from the Gallic invasion than her neighbors across the Tiber. The sack of 390 BCE probably represented the last wave of a much larger invasion. Rome was burned, the Palatine settlement destroyed, the poor huts on the Esquiline reduced to ashes, but the capital held. From that moment on, Rome began her rise. Conquest followed, largely at the expense of the declining Etruscans. Every summer, the army marched out as a matter of routine. If no Etruscan town stood ready for siege, then a Latin neighbor would do. Or failing that, a Volscian or Sabine community from the hills. History isn't just dates and names, it's stories, argued over, reshaped, and sometimes completely reinvented. And Rome, more than almost any civilization, understood the power of stories. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadowy beginnings of Rome, please give this video a like. It really does help more people find the channel. If you're new here, subscribe, because this is just one chapter in a much larger story we're telling together, and I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Rome was shaped more by myth or by hard reality? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Your likes, your comments, and your subscriptions aren't just numbers. They motivate me to dig deeper, research harder, and keep bringing you thoughtful, long-form history like this. So thank you for watching, for supporting the channel, and for coming back. There's much more to come.